Breaking now, when it comes to Hurricane Milton, we now have a Category 5 hurricane. Latest update from the National Hurricane Center. The hurricane hunters have been flying through this and sampling what's been going on, and they just continue to find this thing strengthening, bottoming out here. Now we can see what's going on. 160 mile per hour winds, Category 5 hurricane. And I mean, look at this thing. Look at that eye, as clear as day now. You can clearly see the eye that is fully formed, and just the incredible convection surrounding that as well. We have watched this thing really just blossom here just in the last several hours. The 5 o'clock advisory, it was a 100 mile per hour hurricane. Central pressure was down around 972. 8 o'clock advisory, so just 3 hours later, it had jumped up 150 mile per hour winds, central pressure down to 940, and now look at where it is. 160 with the winds, pressure down to 925. This is one of the fastest, rapidly intensifying hurricanes on record, for sure. This is a monster of a storm. Unfortunately, right now, not impacting land, thank goodness, but it is forecast to kind of skirt right along and just north of the Yucatan. That's in the forecast here, so we'll be watching that very closely as it moves in that direction. And then as it tracks its way across the eastern parts of the Gulf of Mexico, you do start to notice, again, a big turn to the north and the east, but you also see in the forecast, at least the official forecast, calling for those wind speeds to come down. Again, that's just the forecast. Doesn't mean that's going to be God's truth and exactly what happens, but the general theme is to see those wind speeds coming down. But I don't want that to let your guard down and think, oh, okay, we're out of the woods. Not by any stretch. We still, as it tries to work its way on in here Wednesday evening, still talking about a major hurricane coming on into the west coast of Florida. So either way, how you slice it here, even if it is less strong than where it is now, this is still a very powerful hurricane coming into a very vulnerable part of the country here when it comes to surge. That is one of the spots that we're very vulnerable here on the west coast of Florida. So there are some of the alerts that are in place right now. We've got hurricane watches that are not just here along the coast, because we could be talking hurricane conditions here. That's at least a possibility reaching far inland. So now we've got Tampa, Fort Myers, Cedar Key all in that, and points in between, but also you can see now, Orlando, you're under a hurricane watch because we could see hurricane conditions coming into the central parts of the state. And then you can see farther to the south, the far southern portion of Florida dealing with tropical storm watches, and then also northbound up around the Big Bend area, areas that were just impacted by a landfalling Helene, dealing with a tropical storm watch because we at least have the possibility for tropical storm conditions showing up there. Seeing some rain right now, not in association with what's going on with Milton, but some of that wet weather has been coming into the west coast of Florida, the southwest portions of Florida, I should say. And we'll see that here through the next couple of hours, moving from essentially west to east. That clears out, and most of the peninsula gets a bit of a quieter spell as we await now the main core of what's going on with Milton. The future radar shows you here, again, this is one model solution. By Thursday morning now, really starting to see that core coming in. But even before that, there'll be some outer bands that'll swing on in. They will bring with them their own heavier downpours, the gusty winds, possibility for even a few isolated tornadoes. We have to watch out for that threat. But there's that main core coming in. And again, don't get too caught in exactly where this is heading in, because again, this could change a bit as we work our way in towards that time frame. Just being prepared for that major hurricane is going to be the key here. Storm surge watches, they are up again along the entire west coast of Florida for the most part, from Cedar Key all the way farther south here into the south portions of the state, and look at some of the storm surge potential values that we could see. And again, this is a sort of a reasonable worst case scenario. If you saw that biggest push of water with the strongest winds coinciding with high tide, these are some of the values that we could see peaking here and maximize 8 to 12 foot storm surge. And that does include us. Tampa, St. Pete, back over towards Clearwater, Sarasota, you're in there as well. And remember what we just came off of, Hurricane Helene, that brought, and again, that was well off towards our west, that brought in 4, 6, up to 7 foot storm surge there in that Tampa area. We could be maybe even doubling that in some cases. So very, very impactful. And even in the areas where it's maybe not as high, these are still life-threatening storm surge values, even to the north and south of that. So, Dr. Postel, this is a very, very dangerous hurricane that is poised to make its way on into the west coast of Florida.
Alex, you're right. There's no way around it. We're going to have life-threatening, dangerous inundation across much of the west coast of Florida, with the landfall coming likely on Thursday at some point. from Hurricane Milton. Now, exactly who gets the worst storm surge, the most inundation, it's going to really depend on where the center goes. It's a bit too far out to really narrow that down right now, but Alex's graphic was spot on for now to give you a sense that a very large area is at dangerous risk for seeing that kind of surge. And the reason why is because we have a Category 5 hurricane right now in the southwestern Gulf of Mexico. Not likely to be a Category 5 at landfall, but still a very dangerous major hurricane with all kinds of hazards that are really going to be impactful. There it is. You can see it. You know what? It kind of at this stage of its life cycle and where it is reminds me a little bit of Hurricane Andrew. Flight level winds here, I'll just show you in a minute, are nearly what Andrew was. The size and the scope of the wind field kind of reminds me of Andrew, and the satellite presentation right in the middle of it reminds me of it. It is that kind of a Category 5 hurricane with lightning right now encircling almost symmetrically the eye, which is in the middle. Now, what does that mean? Well, when you have a lot of bad thunderstorms right circling around the middle of it, you're going to force that air downward right in the center. And as that air descends pretty quickly, it's going to warm up, and that lowers the pressure at the surface. And the pressure we know is really low right now, and the wind is in response strengthening and circulating around it very quickly. This is a bad vortex right now that is only going to potentially get a little bit stronger before it's maxed out. There's the Hurricane Center's most recent pass right through there, and they measured a pressure somewhere around 925 millibars. Remember, Andrew was around 922 when it made landfall. Flight level winds 158 knots, which is over 180 miles per hour. This is about 7,000 or 8,000 plus feet above the surface, so maybe the winds at the surface aren't quite that strong, but with a hurricane this intense, the ratio between the flight level wind and the surface level wind, well, you can throw your traditional ratios out because there's a lot of vertical mixing, very little stability is in the way, and you can get some incredible winds at the surface in a situation like this. So this is definitely a Category 5. Again, I think Andrew's wind at flight level, the last one I saw was 166 knots. So this is right about there, circulating around. Thankfully, nowhere near land, at least not bringing any of the bad weather anywhere near land for now. But we have to watch out for a little while longer, 12 to 18 hours, I think, where the atmosphere and the ocean are going to conspire to give it a little bit more room, maybe even to get a bit stronger. Here's one of the reasons why. There is what's called a subtropical jet stream right to its north. Now, that's a little bit different than a mid-latitude jet stream over Chicago. This one is higher up, so it's not bringing a lot of wind shear through Milton right now. It is not doing that. What it's doing at the high altitudes is allowing the outflowing air from Milton to escape. Milton is exhaling very effectively. And when you can exhale, well, then you can take a deep breath and you can contract all that bad weather right into the middle of it, and we're seeing that right now happening, ongoing in front of your eyes with a top-end hurricane in the Bay of Campeche or just to its north in the southern Gulf of Mexico. It's a relatively compact storm. You can see some of the surface observations. We're not even seeing weather that's different than any other October afternoon. But we have to watch very closely where the center goes. We're thinking right now that the worst of the weather is going to remain north of the Yucatan. The core of it does. And with a hurricane like this, it's all about the eye wall when you think of the extreme damage potential. All of that is hiding in here. If you can escape the eye wall, yeah, bad weather, all kinds of impacts, but nothing what is in hiding inside of that tempest called the eye wall where the Category 5 conditions are occurring. That's what we think is going to happen, thankfully, for parts of Mexico, but there's still a little bit of uncertainty even there. Then we have to talk about the impacts to the west coast of Florida. Where Milton goes is going to matter a lot. Either way, we're going to get impacts. Look, even on the East Coast, Miami, for example, could see some strong gusty winds out of the south on Thursday morning with the center of Milton so far away. Strong winds, even on the advance of Milton toward the west coast, will begin to increase along the east coast of Florida. But where exactly Milton goes, right, the center of it, we don't know yet. And that's going to matter a lot because along and to the right of where it goes, that's where the most dangerous wind and surge will come by far. There is support right now through the GFS ensemble members that a track takes it north of Tampa. That's terrible. That's the worst case scenario for Tampa and areas just to the south, like Bradenton and Sarasota. This is awful. Again, there's a couple of days to sort all this out, but we need to be mindful that the very worst of still potentially major Hurricane Milton coming on in as a absolutely life-threatening situation for many of us along the west coast of Florida. Molly, again, we have a lot of time to sort all the details out, but this is not at all what we're going to be wanting to contend with in just a couple of days.
And especially less than 2 weeks from Helene's impacts along the west coast of Florida.